Some stories don't begin with thunder, they begin with quiet devotion. Michael Harris was the type of man who believed love was something you didn't just feel, you provided. He worked long hours, skipped vacations, and turned sleepless nights into overtime just to build a future he believed was worth fighting for. Vanessa, his wife of 8 years, had once looked at him as if he were her safe place. At least that was what he thought. What Michael didn't know was that while he built a life with hopes and sacrifices, someone else was slowly tearing it down from the shadows he never suspected. Someone he trusted just as much, his best friend, Aaron Miller. Marcus Rader, narrator of this story, often says, "Betrayal isn't always a strike. It's sometimes a silent erosion of trust, unnoticed until you feel the ground collapse beneath you." And that's exactly what was happening to Michael. He believed loyalty was the foundation of their marriage and friendship, while Vanessa and Aaron saw his devotion as a weakness. To them, Michael wasn't a husband or a brother-in-arms. He was a stepping stone, one they could wipe their feet on to rise higher. It began subtly. Vanessa coming home later than usual, claiming after-work meetings and gym sessions. Aaron spending more evenings at their home, showing up just when Michael was too exhausted to suspect anything. They shared glances when Michael wasn't looking, private smiles, rehearsed sympathy, and small lies that stitched themselves into a web of deceit. Michael didn't notice, not yet, but betrayal, like poison, doesn't kill instantly. It spreads quietly until the heart stops believing in love and starts preparing for something darker. There's a certain type of loneliness that hides itself inside routines. Michael didn't feel alone because Vanessa was absent. He felt alone because she was present, yet distant. She smiled less, touched him less, and laughed only when her phone lit up with notifications she never let him see. When Michael asked how her day was, she answered in short phrases that ended conversations rather than started them. At first, he blamed stress, work, maybe even himself. He cooked dinner when she claimed to be tired, massaged her shoulders when she said work was getting harder, and even apologized when she acted irritated for reasons she never explained. Meanwhile, Aaron's presence in Michael's life grew even stronger. He positioned himself as a supportive friend, the type who always had the right words to calm doubts, except the words were carefully crafted to push Michael further into blind trust. And Michael, being the kind-hearted man he was, didn't see manipulation. He saw loyalty. Marcus often says, "Some betrayals are rehearsed in silence long before they are performed in full." Vanessa and Aaron had mastered their silent rehearsals. They exchanged secret texts during dinners. They locked eyes for just a second too long when Michael looked away. They even created inside jokes built on mocking Michael's kindness, but they never moved too fast, not yet. They waited for the perfect moment, like predators waiting for their prey to grow weaker. And that moment arrived when Michael, out of love, decided to help Vanessa reconnect with herself by paying for a career development retreat she claimed would help her become more confident and independent. She looked at him with false tears and thanked him for believing in her. Aaron congratulated Michael for being such a supportive husband. Neither meant it. That night, while Michael slept with the relief of thinking he was strengthening his marriage, Vanessa and Aaron texted each other until dawn, planning a future in which Michael didn't exist. The retreat weekend arrived faster than Michael expected. He drove Vanessa to the airport himself, holding her hand the whole way there, not realizing she had already let go of him emotionally months ago. She hugged him with just enough warmth to keep suspicion sleeping, whispered, "Thank you for believing in me," and left with a smile that wasn't meant for him. What Michael didn't know was that Vanessa never checked into any retreat. Instead, she met Aaron at a private cabin they had booked under false names, a place far from anyone who might recognize them. To them, it felt like freedom. To Michael, back home alone, it felt like hope. He spent the weekend planning small surprises for her return, a candlelit dinner, a letter expressing how proud he was of her dedication, and an updated savings projection for the future he believed they were building together. Marcus once said, "When love is honest, it doesn't prepare for betrayal because it cannot imagine it." That was Michael's greatest vulnerability. On Sunday evening, Vanessa returned home intending to be exhausted. She let Michael hold her, let him believe she had grown stronger during her self-discovery journey, and let him fall even deeper into a love she no longer shared. Days passed, and her lies multiplied. Aaron Aaron became her secret confidant, and their affair grew bolder. They started meeting in hotels during Michael's work hours, laughing about how easy it was to fool him. Vanessa began treating Michael with subtle irritation, dismissing his affection as clinginess. When he surprised her with tickets to a weekend getaway for their anniversary, she forced a smile and accepted, only to text Aaron moments later, calling Michael pathetic. But life has a way of sharpening a man's intuition when his heart starts to bleed in silence. Michael didn't suspect the truth yet, but something inside him began to whisper that love wasn't supposed to feel this cold. There comes a point when the heart begins to notice what the mind refuses to see. For Michael, the first crack appeared one evening when Vanessa came home smelling faintly of Aaron's cologne, something he recognized but couldn't immediately place. When he asked how her day went, she snapped at him for being too curious, then apologized with a kiss that felt rehearsed. He brushed it off, convincing himself that stress was changing her mood, not another man. But once a question is born in silence, it doesn't die easily. It grows roots in every strange glance, every secretive smile, every late return home with vague explanations. Marcus has often said, it's not the betrayal itself that breaks a man, it's the moment he realizes love may have become a lie. That moment came closer when Michael noticed Vanessa laughing at her phone during dinner, hiding the screen in a way she never used it. When he asked who she was talking to, she replied, just work, without looking up. Later that night, when she went to shower, her phone buzzed with a message preview Michael accidentally saw. I miss you already. Last weekend felt perfect. Can't wait for more. His breath caught. The initials at the end of the message were just an A, his best friend's initial. His chest tightened, not with certainty, but with a fear so sickening, he forced himself to believe it could be someone else, maybe a co-worker, maybe a misunderstanding, maybe anything but what it truly was. So he erased the thought, hugged her in bed that night, and convinced himself that trust was stronger than doubt. But trust cannot erase what the eyes have seen, nor silence what the soul has begun to suspect. Michael didn't confront Vanessa about the message. Instead, he began to watch, quietly, carefully, almost fearfully. Doubt had entered his soul, like a whisper, and once he found space, it lingered in everything. He noticed the way she kept her phone face down on every surface, the way she flinched slightly whenever he walked into the room while she was texting, the way she suddenly started showering immediately after coming home, as if erasing a scent he was never meant to recognize. Aaron, too, began acting differently. He still visited, but now he was overly cautious, almost rehearsed in his friendliness. He laughed louder, spoke faster, made eye contact less. It was as if he feared something might slip out if silence ever settled too long. Michael didn't know the full truth yet, but he began to see enough fragments to understand that something was terribly wrong. Still, he clung to hope, not because he trusted them, but because he feared the consequences of knowing. Silence became his greatest weapon and his greatest curse. He intended not to notice Vanessa's lies while quietly monitoring them in the back of his mind. He intended to sleep when she slipped out of bed late at night to get water, only to return after 10 minutes with a faint smile. He noticed how she suddenly cared more about her appearance when going to work. He noticed how Aaron stopped talking to him about personal matters, shifting every conversation toward shallow distractions. But what hurt most was not what he saw, it was what he remembered. He remembered the nights he stayed awake working extra hours to support Vanessa's dreams. He remembered the time Aaron convinced him that real friendship meant sacrifice. He remembered how he trusted both of them more than he trusted himself. Now, every memory felt like a wound reopening. He didn't confront them, not yet. Some truths must be faced with certainty, not emotion. Michael didn't rush toward confrontation. Instead, he allowed his suspicion to evolve into quiet observation. He noticed that whenever he mentioned extending work hours, Vanessa seemed strangely relieved. Whenever he casually brought up Aaron in conversations, she looked away too quickly, as if hiding a reaction. One evening, Michael lied, telling Vanessa he would be working late and unreachable. He left the house house as usual, but instead of going to the office, he parked his car a few streets away and waited in silence. 2 hours later, a car pulled into their driveway. It was Aaron's. Michael watched through the darkened windshield as Vanessa opened the door before Aaron even knocked. Her expression, too, warm to belong to a friendly drop-by. They disappeared inside without hesitation. Michael didn't follow them in. He didn't cause a scene. He simply sat there, gripping the steering wheel, feeling the final piece of trust inside him dissolve. Yet he didn't cry. Something inside him had gone quiet, cold, calculated, waiting. From that night on, Michael became a different man, although he hid it well. In front of Vanessa, he remained gentle, soft-spoken, even loving. But beneath that calmness, a quiet storm was gathering. He stopped offering explanations about his whereabouts, began leaving home earlier without warning, and occasionally returned, looking composed but thoughtful, as if forming silent equations in his mind. Vanessa, confident in her deception, believed Michael was still blind. Aaron shared that arrogance. They thought of Michael as weak, emotionally dependent, deceiving of being alone, someone who would break rather than fight. They were wrong. Pain had carved something new. Inside him, don't rage, not bitterness, something sharper, a desire for truth that wasn't desperate, but patient. He didn't want revenge and anger. He wanted clarity and silence. And when a man stops reacting emotionally and starts moving in stillness, it often means he's preparing for something irreversible. Michael didn't confront Vanessa or Aaron after that night. Instead, he returned to the routine of a faithful husband, but now with eyes that saw everything. He began collecting quiet evidence, not in the form of photos or recordings, but in the form of patterns. Vanessa's sudden increase in work meetings, Aaron's calls that always came when Michael stepped outside, her unexplained expenses, Aaron's sudden defensiveness whenever someone joked about loyalty. He never checked her phone again, because he no longer needed proof to believe what his heart already knew. He only needed time. When Vanessa left lipstick-stained napkins in her purse that weren't from their home, he didn't question her. When Aaron accidentally mentioned a restaurant Michael had never been to with Vanessa, he only nodded. The worst part wasn't knowing they were betraying him. It was realizing how easily they believed he would never figure it out. Something changed in him the day he stood in front of the bathroom mirror and realized he was no longer waiting for them to stop. He was waiting for himself to accept what needed to be done. Acceptance didn't come with anger or tears. It came with a chilling calmness. He started spending more time alone, not out of sadness, but out of preparation. He began withdrawing emotionally from Vanessa, but not visibly. He still hugged her, still said good night, still kissed her forehead, but his eyes no longer searched for love in hers. They searched for patterns of guilt. He didn't need confrontation. He needed them to keep believing they were winning. Only then would their downfall taste like their own choice. When Michael started withdrawing money slowly from the joint savings and redirecting his salary into a private account, Vanessa didn't notice. Why would she? In her mind, Michael was still the same devoted, predictable husband, but she had forgotten one truth. When a patient man decides to stop loving, his silence becomes the deadliest weapon of all. The following weeks were silently calculated. Michael arrived later, spoke less, and rarely asked questions. Vanessa, who had previously been irritated by small displays of affection, began to question his emotional absence. "You've been quiet lately. Is everything okay?" she asked one night, trying to sound concerned. He just smiled softly and said, "Just tired." His tone was so calm that she believed him, but something about his tranquility made her uneasy. He didn't seem sad. He didn't seem suspicious. He didn't seem in love, nor hurt. He seemed distant, and distance, when it comes from someone who cared too much, is the first sign that something has been lost forever. Vanessa, overconfident in her own manipulation, thought perhaps Michael was simply entering a phase of exhaustion. She didn't realize that his silence was no longer fragility, it was strategy. Aaron noticed the change too. The few times he saw Michael, he felt uncomfortable with the way his friend looked at him, not with suspicion, but with a calm observation, like someone who already knew a truth, but was in no rush to speak it. One night, while the three of them were at a casual dinner with other friends, Vanessa and Aaron avoided looking at each other as usual. usual. But at one point, they caught themselves exchanging a quick, concerned glance when Michael asked a simple question. Do you ever think people underestimate how much others can notice when things change? He said it, looking into his glass, without raising his voice or expressing emotion. But the phrase pierced them both like an invisible needle. They laughed forcefully, trying to ignore the feeling that something in that question wasn't about philosophy. It was about warning. Michael didn't need to accuse them. He just needed to make them wonder how much he really knew. Because sometimes what destroys a traitor isn't being found out. It's believing they already have been. Michael began to rebuild his life invisibly, like someone preparing for a war others still believe will never happen. He discreetly transferred part of his finances to an individual account, updated important documents, reviewed life insurance policies, and changed beneficiaries. He began researching lawyers, not out of immediate necessity, but because he knew that the truth, sooner or later, would require proof and protection. At work, he quietly requested a possible transfer to another branch, something that could happen within a few months, and left everything open for when the time was right. There was no longer any sadness in his eyes. There was purpose. He didn't need to cry. He needed to organize his departure so that, when he left, there would be nothing left of them to destroy. And when he was finally ready, it wouldn't be Vanessa who would decide how it all ended. It would be him. Vanessa began to realize that something in her was changing too, not out of guilt, but out of insecurity. She liked the feeling of being in control of Michael, of knowing he loved her enough to tolerate any slight. But now he was different, more confident, more focused, less dependent. He asked fewer questions and smiled more, but not with affection, with calm. And calm, for someone who fears exposure, is frightening. She tried to reignite small arguments in the hope of forcing some emotional response, but he remained unfazed. He even began leaving kind notes around the house, as if he were a devoted husband, but never accompanied by actual displays of affection. Each act of affection seemed calculated, as if he were trying to keep up appearances for an audience she couldn't see. Aaron, for his part, increased the hidden messages, bothered by feeling Michael more unattainable. They didn't know exactly what was happening, but they began to realize that Michael's departure wouldn't be a breakdown. It would be a process. And the worst part was that nothing seemed under control anymore. Michael's first intentional move wasn't an accusation, but a subtle shift that only the guilty mind could detect. He began asking vague questions about fidelity during ordinary conversations, as if he were simply reflecting on life. One day over breakfast, he said calmly, "It's strange how some people think betrayal only hurts when it's discovered, but sometimes the heart breaks long before the truth comes out." Vanessa paused for a second, hesitant to pretend she hadn't been touched by that statement, and then responded with a light laugh, calling him dramatic. But her gaze flickered before shifting to her cup. Aaron wasn't unscathed either. During a casual conversation about friendship, Michael said, "People often say best friends are the ones who stand beside you in hard times, but sometimes the ones closest are the ones holding the knife." Aaron swallowed hard, covering it with a joke, but felt an uncomfortable chill. They weren't sure Michael knew, but now they were certain he was no longer the blind man they used to manipulate. Over time, Vanessa began to grow restless. She called Michael more frequently when he wasn't home, asking, "When are you coming back?" in a tone that mixed false concern with mild desperation. Aaron urged her to remain calm, claiming that Michael just seemed tired. But they both began to notice something that frightened them more than the possibility of being discovered. Michael showed no visible pain. He hadn't become aggressive. He wasn't crying. He wasn't begging for attention. He simply lived, like someone who had already made a decision. And silent decisions are more dangerous than outbursts of anger, because those who act in desperation are predictable, but those who act in silence are already building something inevitable. With each passing day, Vanessa and Aaron stopped fearing the discovery of their betrayal and began to fear what Michael would do when he finally decided it was time to act. Michael's first visible step came when he casually announced that he was reorganizing his finances for security reasons. Vanessa pretended to support the idea, but panicked as soon as she realized she no longer had full access to her accounts as before. Aaron told her to remain calm, but his own voice trembled. Michael also began keeping fewer things at home and more in a small, private safe he'd never used before. Vanessa, uncomfortable, casually asked what had changed. Michael smiled gently and replied, "Sometimes it's smart to prepare for unexpected endings." The sentence was said with such calmness that it sounded more like a farewell than an explanation. Insecurity began to erode the trust between Vanessa and Aaron. She began to demand reassurance, asking if he believed Michael knew. Aaron, who had previously seemed so confident, began to doubt the wisdom of continuing the affair. "Maybe we should slow down," he said one night. Vanessa interpreted this as fear and weakness, initiating quiet, quick text exchanges. Meanwhile, Michael watched everything slowly unravel, as if watching a house of cards fall piece by piece, a house they had built themselves. He hadn't revealed anything yet, but he had already taken emotional control. His silence became the sentence they had desperately tried to avoid. Every look Michael gave now carried weight. Every quiet smile seemed to hold a secret, and even without uttering an accusation, he made them feel like defendants awaiting trial. The truth had not yet been told, but it had already begun to take its toll. Michael began the second phase of his strategy, to make Vanessa and Aaron doubt not only what he knew, but also what he might be planning. He began asking seemingly random questions like, "Do you believe some people only realize someone's worth when it's too late?" Or, "Have you ever considered that some actions can have permanent consequences?" It wasn't the content of the question that frightened them. It was the calm, firm tone with which he posed them, as if each phrase were carefully selected to resonate in their minds later. Vanessa started sleeping less. Every time Michael lay quietly beside her and fell asleep all too quickly, she felt a deep sense of unease. People who have been betrayed should scream, cry, or act destructively, but Michael just slept, or seemed to. Sometimes she would watch his face for minutes, wondering, does he know? Aaron was different too. He complained that Michael looked at him with something that wasn't hate, but knowledge. Sometimes when they were together, Aaron would try to bring up the subject of loyalty or secrets between friends, but Michael would respond with short sentences and a subtle smile that made Aaron want to leave. The tension between Vanessa and Aaron grew. They began to argue more privately, blaming each other for the potential discovery and questioning who had given them any clues. Thus, without saying a word, Michael separated them emotionally. He made each fear that the other was the reason for their downfall. While they tore themselves apart inside, trying to predict his reaction, Michael remained calm, going to work, coming home, having dinner in silence, as if everything were perfectly normal. But now there was something different in his eyes. Not pain, not love, not suffering. An end was being carefully constructed, and they felt it without a word being spoken. It was during a seemingly peaceful dinner that Michael decided the first act of the end should begin. He suggested Aaron join them to celebrate the good times. The invitation took them both by surprise, but neither dared refuse, fearing that saying no would seem too suspicious. The table was silent, uncomfortable, filled with guarded glances. Michael, however, seemed light-hearted, almost serene. He calmly poured the wine, looked at them both and said, "You know, I've been thinking a lot about loyalty lately, how it's not something you lose instantly. It fades every time someone you trust chooses themselves over you." Vanessa tried to disguise the tension with a fake smile. Aaron swallowed hard. Michael continued, "Some people think betrayal is about being caught, but real betrayal begins when love is still there and someone decides to kill it quietly." At that moment, he revealed something that made them both freeze. He placed two keys they had never seen before on the table. "These," he said softly, "are for the apartment I've been moving my things into for the past month." The shock was immediate. Vanessa went white. Aaron looked away. Michael didn't yell, didn't accuse, didn't demand explanations. He just watched them as the truth slowly spread like poison through an already fragile body. "I won't ask why," he said calmly, "because I already know. I'm not here to make you explain your choices. I'm here to show you I'm no longer part of them." Vanessa tried to speak, but her voice faltered. Aaron mumbled something about misinterpretation. Michael laughed softly, not humorously, but with an almost sad relief. "I trusted you both," he said, looking first at her, then at Aaron, "and you both thought I'd break. But I didn't break. I just stopped, belonging to the place where I was being destroyed." From that moment on, they didn't just fear the loss of him. They feared the fact that he had left emotionally much earlier than they had imagined. And now there was nothing in his gaze that wanted to forgive. Vanessa tried to speak again, but Michael calmly raised his hand. "You don't need to explain it to me," he said. "Explain it to yourself and to each other." His tone was cold, but not cruel. It was the kind of coldness that only exists when someone has already suffered everything they had to suffer, and now nothing more can reach them. Aaron tried to justify himself. "Michael, it's not what you think," but was interrupted by a look that carried something more painful than hatred, disappointment, and disinterest. "You don't exist in my future," Michael replied. "Neither of you do." He picked up his jacket and placed an envelope with printed documents on the table. "Divorce papers," he said, looking directly at Vanessa. "Already reviewed by my lawyer. You won't get access to the accounts. I took care of that legally before tonight. There are no arguments left to make." Vanessa tried to touch his arm, but he drew back with a calm that made her feel she had lost something far greater than a husband, had lost any shred of worth he had once seen in her. Aaron remained silent, not daring to look Michael in the eye. He knew he had lost more than a friendship. He had lost the right to consider himself a man of honor. Michael walked toward the door, and before leaving he simply said, "I loved you both, and you taught me that love cannot survive where betrayal grows." He left. He didn't slam the door. He simply closed it softly behind him. Inside the house, the silence was so heavy that the two traitors couldn't look at each other without feeling shame. What they hadn't expected was for Michael's absence to be so cutting, not because he threatened them, but because he didn't need to. His indifference became the emotional sentence each of them would have to bear. They had destroyed a man, expecting to see him implode. Instead, they saw him leave whole, while they themselves began to crumble internally. Over the next few weeks, Vanessa tried to text Michael, not out of love, but to regain some emotional or financial control. Every attempt was ignored. There were no insults, no emotional blocks, no yelling, no threats. There was silence. And for someone who always believed she had power over other people's feelings, the silence was the most devastating punishment. She began to question when she lost not only her husband, but also her dignity. Aaron, for his part, tried to distance himself from Vanessa after realizing that, by destroying Michael, they had also destroyed any trust between them. The clandestine relationship quickly died, stifled by guilt and the constant fear of being judged by any public gaze. They were not exposed to the world, but they were sentenced to live with the knowledge that they had betrayed someone who never wished them harm, until he was forced to choose his own emotional demise over his internal destruction. Michael never sought revenge as a means of destruction, but as a means of liberation. He moved on with his new life in silence, keeping his distance from the storm he left behind. He didn't change to show strength. He changed because there was nothing left in that past worth keeping alive. In his new days, he never spoke ill of them to anyone. He didn't need to. When truth is defended not by hatred, but by the peace of those who survived it, it becomes even more powerful. Vanessa and Aaron had to live with the idea that Michael didn't fight them. He just overcame them. And sometimes, being forgotten by someone you tried to destroy is the cruelest punishment of all. This was Marcus Reed. And not all betrayals end in chaos. Some end in a silence so heavy, it becomes a curse that lives longer than guilt itself.